What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. Thank y'all for the crazy support lately. Y'all absolutely popping off. Thank you to that. We got ourselves a new sponsor and partnership with Dubby Energy here, an amazing company that is bringing focus and energy alertness to the gaming community with their amazing different flavors of this energy drink. So make sure to use code Jedii at checkout for 10% off, and just thank you to them. Now in this video here, we are going over another Arc 3.0 Warlock build utilizing the new exotic helmet, the Fallen Sunstar. Starting off here for our Stormcaller build, as always, we're going over our abilities, aspects, and fragments first. So we're using our Storm Trance Super, Healing Rift, and Strafe Glide. Next off, we have our Chain Lightning melee abilities. So when we actually melee someone, it jolts our targets as well. That'll be important for creating more additional Ionic Traces. Next off, we have our Storm Grenade, or you can throw on the Pulse Grenade. They work hand in hand in my opinion, so that is a personal preference. I think the Pulse Grenade might give us a little more of those Ionic Traces than the Storm does, but Storm definitely does better with that higher DPS. Now for our aspects here, we have Arc Soul for our first one. So casting our Rift creates an Arc Soul that tracks and shoots enemies. When we are amplified, it has that increased fire rate, which is also important because these Arc Souls, when they get those final defeats, count as ability defeats, which will in turn help us create more Ionic Traces for that exotic helmet of ours. Second off, we have Electrostatic Mind, so defeating targets with arc abilities or jolted or blinded targets creates an Ionic Trace, so that is where our melee jolting enemies comes into play, as well as our Arc Souls, because once again, they do count as arc abilities. When we collect Ionic Traces, it makes us amplified, so just another little facet of this build that helps a lot without you really noticing. Next off for our fragments here, we have Spark of Ion. So defeating a jolted target creates Ionic Traces, hence why we have that melee on, just helping us get more and more of these Ionic Traces to proc. Next off, we have Spark of Discharge, so our weapon final blows that are arc have a chance to create Ionic Traces, which will come into play with our loadout here. Next off, we have Spark of Shock, so our grenades jolt our targets. That's why I think between the Storm Grenade and Pulse, they seem to be the best because of their lingering effects that we're going to have with the Spark of Magnitude here. That makes those Storm and Pulse and Lightning Grenades stay a little bit longer, but having that ability to jolt enemies with our grenade is super key as well for just creating more and more Ionic Traces. Moving on to our weapons here, we have a Submission SMG with Subsistence and Demolitionist. This is going to help us get back our grenades super fast with getting those defeats because of Demolitionist. Now we're going to be running the Delicate Tomb Exotic Fusion Rifle from this season in a couple other builds as well, just because I think it is an S tier weapon with the ability to generate Ionic Traces intrinsically, not just because it's an arc weapon pairing that with our fragment, but intrinsically it has that potential to create Ionic Traces in itself. And when it creates those Ionic Traces and it collects them, even from other sources in our abilities, it becomes overcharged where we jolt our next enemy when we do damage on them. So it is another facet of that feedback loop of jolting enemies to again create more Ionic Traces, which will overpower this, again creating that jolting effect with the next damage output. Finally, for our weapons, we're going to be using the 7th Seraph Saw with Clown Cartridge and Vorpal. This will help us in our DPS department when we take it into some of those lost sectors in the Legendary and Master versions, as well as those higher up strikes. Definitely a very good raid build as well, but this with that arc burn on it has the chances to create more Ionic Traces as well for our exotic helmet. Now, the Fallen Sunstar is very similar to the Crown of Tempest with getting our arc abilities back, but with these Ionic Traces, we're sharing that love in having them move faster so we can get them to our person way faster than they move normally, and it grants us a little additional ability energy than normal. Now, we're also giving that ability energy gain to nearby allies when we collect ions, so it is very nice to share that love in being able to spam grenades, melees, and your class ability when you're collecting them near those allies, getting this as more of a support class than a solo DPS ability spam. Now, for the mods that we have on this, we're going to throw in elemental armaments, so both our Delicate Tomb and our Seven Seraph Saw will have chances to create arc elemental wells on final weapon defeats, as well as harmonic siphon, so both of these weapons have chances to create orbs of power as well, just giving us back our super a little bit faster. Now, on our arms here, we have another set of elemental armaments, so we can produce more of those arc elemental wells on those arc weapon final defeats. We're also throwing 2 sets of focusing strike on our arms here, so it grants us class ability when we cause damage with that jolting melee attack, and with collecting arc elemental wells as well as those Ionic Traces, we're going to be able to have our melee and our rift back with this super often, creating that jolting effect and those arc souls very often to again create more Ionic Traces via those jolted enemy defeats as well as those arc ability energy defeats. For our chest piece here, we're running Bountiful Wells, which allows us to stack those elemental armaments that we have on our other pieces of armor, as well as some supplementary for our machine gun and fusion with those reserves. Next, on our boots here, again, we got another set of elemental armaments, so we're going to be creating 3 or 4 of those arc elemental wells pretty much every single time we get a defeat with our arc weapons. And since the majority of the time we're going to be using that fusion rifle, there's going to be so many Ionic Traces and arc elemental wells around. This allows us to get our abilities back super fast, as well as sharing that love with our nearby allies in those Ionic Traces and that exotic helmet. And finally, in our class item here, we're going to have Trace Evidence and Amped Up from our Season Artifact. So defeating combatants that are affected by an arc debuff like Jolted create Ionic Traces. So another way of just us being able to create more and more Ionic Traces. And we're staying amplified longer. So when we do throw down our Rift for those Arc Souls, they have that faster fire rate, getting us more defeats, creating more Ionic Traces. As you can see, I know I've said that, but that is definitely how this build plays out perfectly for helping us and other Guardians. And finally, seeking wells. So all of those arc elemental wells that we created with our weapons over there, we are getting them to track to us again, giving us our abilities back a little bit faster every single time we pick up an elemental well. So this build is super amazing for our own ability spam as well as our allies. So it's a little more of a support Arc 3.0 build than running the normal Crown of Tempest, which helps you alone get your arc abilities back faster. So this right here with its Ionic Traces and getting that extra ability energy as well as sharing that is super good for the entire fire team getting abilities, and it is a super fun build to just run in general with an arc ability spam for Warlock. Like I said, very easy to take this into our endgame activities in Master Lost Sectors, raids, strikes, and when GMs come out, you just might have to change a few things around for mods and champions. But this fusion rifle is super S tier in my personal opinion, especially on something like Warlock here with this Fallen Sunstar helmet, which has those improved Ionic Traces just feeding into the intrinsic perks of that fusion rifle. So definitely everyone out there who is a Warlock main and just getting into Destiny, this build right here is super amazing for our ability spams in our Arc 3.0 world here that we got going on. Lots more builds coming out. Very similar one with the Submission and Delicate Tomb. Just think it is 2 of our best weapons this season to pair together for that ability spam. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully y'all enjoy this. I appreciate all that support lately. Make sure to check out W Energy, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.